It had been a couple decades since I last saw Gattaca, the story of a natural-born young man trying to achieve his potential in a world of genetically enhanced supermen. It invariably leads to comparisons with Brave New World, but what struck me on my most recent viewing wasn't so much Huxley as Orwell. The film opens in a plain but clean utilitarian concrete room. No simple morning shower, this is Lady Macbeth levels of obsessive scrubbing. And when he's done, the remains are incinerated. Evidence consigned to the memory hole. This is Vincent on his way to work, where he isn't Vincent, but Jerome. A much more desirable identity acquired at great cost and an illusion he must carefully maintain. See, in a world of custom-crafted artisanal humans, Vincent is a base model HSAP with a substandard heart. He wants to be an astronaut, to push back the boundaries of human knowledge, but society deems him fit only to be a menial laborer. Until he finds a cover identity to open doors, and oh, do they open when you have the right gene sequence.
Congratulations.
Well, what about the interview?
That was it.
Where Gattaca's control of the human genome fundamentally differs from Brave New World is that in Huxley's book, there are no families and the human population is a product of central planning. So many alphas to run things, so many gammas and epsilons to do the grunt work. Gattaca depicts a more competitive approach. Everyone tries to optimize their children, tries to make them alphas, and throws them out into the world to compete with the other optimized alphas for the top spots.
It's silver.
So?
Jerome Morrow was never meant to be one step down on the podium.
We could go for a class struggle analogy here, but I don't think it really works. Vincent is just trying to pass as a member of the privileged class. It's his individual struggle that, while in some ways symbolic of the wider split in that society, is ultimately about his personal goals.
You might get ideas.
Yeah, but if the glass is clean, it'll be easier for you to see me when I'm on the other side of it.
Huh.
Which isn't to say it doesn't have implications for wider political philosophy.
Now, only seconds old, the exact time and cause of my death was already known.
For one thing, it blows up the whole post-Enlightenment Western liberal tradition. In this world, the idea that all men are created equal is demonstrably false. All now come with a spec sheet that can be compared to others, and compared they are.
9.3. Quite a catch.
Yes. Quite a catch.
Only the assumption behind that society isn't true. Vincent has none of these advantages. He's a genetic invalid, second tier. But he's not only smart enough to do the job, he's able to fool most of his optimized betters right up to the end. Of course, he can't do it alone. Enter Jerome, who had every advantage. But physics trumps genetics. After being hit by a car, he's confined to a wheelchair in need of a source of income, and his most valuable asset is his identity. Jerome provides a pedigree and a steady supply of blood, urine, and various biologic detritus to keep Vincent supplied through the constant checks. Meanwhile, Vincent keeps Jerome housed and supplied with good booze while working to get himself on a mission to Titan. There's a lot of space launches happening in the background of this movie. We don't really know what's going on in the wider world, but we do have some hints, little details with profound implications. For example, there's a lot of artifice in the new humanity. Genetic enhancement isn't just about eliminating defects or optimizing intelligence or athleticism. Aesthetic preferences play a role.
You have specified hazel eyes, dark hair, and fair skin.
Even more noteworthy are specializations like this pianist.
That piece can only be played with 12.
How much of this is going on we don't know, but it suggests a whole subset of humanity being tailored for specific fields according to the desires of their parents. The beginnings of speciation, perhaps starting with entertainers, but likely not staying there. Maybe there are singers with unnatural voice range, or 8-foot-tall men with oversized hearts dominating the NBA. Specializations for other fields follow, setting aside whether you can breed for interest in something. There's hints of the world going in some very weird directions. And that the specialization is concentrated amongst the already well-off. Whether just taking out a propensity for disease, optimizing intelligence, or adding in some tailored mutation, these services aren't free. Not everyone can afford them, but no one can afford not to. The gap between the haves and have-nots, the valid and invalid, widens. but it also suggests a population decline, or at least population growth decline, concentrated on the top end. Genetic optimization requires a team of technicians doing the work. It takes a clinic to raise a gene-mod child. That puts a cap on how many such births you can have in any given year. Each baby requires a staff of specialists. Couple that with the demographic trends we're already seeing, with the wealthiest, both in terms of class and by country, having the fastest decline in birth rates, and the society depicted in this film may avoid one of the big potential problems. The overproduction of elites, as Peter Turchin calls it. Too many people being trained for and expecting high-level jobs with the attendant pay and status, too few of those positions to go around. Societal destabilization and mayhem ensues. Of course, most of the people self-styled as elites these days are just entitled parasites, but that's another issue. Depending on how expensive genetic enhancement is and how many tiers are available for the right price, that world may be facing a very different problem. They're still dependent on the less endowed to do most of the real work, growing food, picking up trash, all the things that make a civilization function. And as the gap widens, they could find themselves sprinting down the road to Eloification. Yep, I'm bringing Wells into it. So quick recap there. Guy builds a time machine and travels into the far future where he finds humanity bifurcated into two species. The Eloi, who live an idyllic life, and the Morlocks, cultureless brutes living in subterranean settlements kept habitable with old industrial machinery. Only the Morlocks are farming the Eloi, providing them with food to keep them lazing about until it's time to go up and harvest a few. Usually seen as a critique of the British class system of the 19th century and the inevitable eating the rich, but we'll talk about that another time as well. Point here being that the valids of that world may be in an increasingly precarious position. And we can't overlook the retro future design. Everyone wears tailored suits. There is an old sci-fi clean minimalism to most of the interior spaces, but also a sort of 20th century blend in the design of vehicles and equipment. There's a feeling of looking backward in their aesthetic preferences, subtly suggesting a culture that senses it's lost something. Or maybe I'm just reading too much into the art design. That would be unprecedented. Maybe more relatable to many is how Vincent has to pretend to be something he's not. At work, in his romantic relationship, it's all about keeping up appearances, meeting expectations.
We don't look anything alike.
It's close enough. When was the last time anybody looked at a photograph?
Vincent is kind of a self-centered prick, bullshitting the world to get his half-blind, heart attack-having ass onto an interplanetary mission. Standards exist for a reason. There is a legitimate risk assessment involved here.
Why should anybody invest all that money to train me when there are 1,000 other applicants with a far cleaner profile?
But he does illustrate the failure of the extreme deterministic view, trying to judge a man's worth by the content of his helix. His limits are real. The reasons for him being unable to qualify for the mission as himself are legitimate. He's potentially putting the rest of the crew in danger, risking other people to serve his desires. But that doesn't detract from it being an inspiring story of overcoming obstacles with grit and determination. It just introduces a fair amount of gray to the story. Not just in terms of the mission. There's Vincent beating his super cop brother through sheer force of will. He just needed it more and gave it everything he had.
You want to know how I did it? This is how I did it, Anton. I never saved anything for the swim back.
Or the project director beating a subordinate to death rather than letting him delay the mission. Or at least confessing to it. That keyboard doesn't look sturdy enough to crack a skull to me. I'm told there's a fan theory that Vincent killed him. The director knew, but covered for him to save the mission.
Strange to think he may have more success exposing me in death than he ever did in life.
There's actually a decent case to be made for that interpretation based on subtext and subtle cues. Vincent hanging back at the scene, that moment of steeling himself to keep his facade up, coupled with the director being just as dedicated to the mission going forward. Little hints that maybe he knows and is covering.
I am not a murderer.
But that's not what grabs me about this film so much as its depiction of the dawning days of a post-human future. And it's a sad day dawning indeed. Because it isn't humanity becoming something better or new, but rather spiraling down into the ruin of our own unmet expectations. None of these genetically superior people are happier for it. They're even more crushed by the weight of their shortcomings. Irene still falls short of her desired job.
An acceptable likelihood of heart failure. I think that's what the manual says. The only trip I'll take in space is around the sun and this satellite right here.
She worries about being good enough as a mate.
If you're still interested, let me know.
Jerome sits around the apartment drinking, to the point he has a hard time delivering a bag of piss clean enough to pass a screening.
There is more vodka in this piss than there is piss.
Vincent's younger brother, Anton, despite being the best fusion his lineage could provide,
This child is still you. Simply the best of you.
he doesn't seem fulfilled in his work. And of course the doctor, whose son falls short of expectations despite being genetically tweaked.
Unfortunately, my son's not all that they promised.
It's a world of people told that they're exceptional while failing at almost everything. That Vincent manages to fool most of them right up to the end is just the crown on this examination of how empty the promise of that world is. To be fair, he gets a little help from his bro, who is well aware that while genetics may stack the deck, they are not destiny.
I'll do a cross-check. I'll find out about his family and whether he's got...
Already run it. There's no record of any living relative.
I like to think that's why the doctor looks the other way at the end.
For future reference, right-handed men don't hold it with their left.
Maybe he considers Vincent to be a friend and wants to do him a solid. Maybe he wants an example for his son, something to show that he isn't limited by expectations and gene sequence. Or maybe he's just sticking it to the system that can't deliver on its promises.
You don't miss your flight, Vincent.
So Vincent passes through that last surprise screening and joins his comrades on the rocket, all wearing their neatly pressed suits for the launch, and off they go to Titan. For Vincent, it doesn't really matter what happens after. He'll be found out one way or another, but they can't very well turn around. He won, and in so doing, he exposed the lie at the heart of their society. And Jerome, the real Jerome, is an unperson. Looping back to Orwell, the film ends with him crawling into that concrete memory hole, closing the door behind him and incinerating himself. Just another piece of evidence or inconvenient biological waste to be destroyed. If you've never seen Gattaca, or if it's been almost 30 years for you too, I recommend giving it a look. There's nothing else quite like it. This collection of rambling observations is based on a recent conversation with Ross and Ryan over at the History on Film podcast. Link to them in the description, but not that specific conversation because it's not out yet.